Ladies and gentlemen, hello. I'm here with Jarrad, the founder of Status, and we're literally just downstairs talking about like archaeology and open source and making a non-evil metaverse. And I've got all the questions to ask. But the first one is, what does Augustus and his postal service in the Roman Empire have in common with what you do?
Yeah, I mean, really great question. I guess Augustus set up the first postal system, right, for the empire. And if we start looking at blockchains as these proto-states or crypto-states or network states, peer-to-peer communications or messaging actually is like a version of the postal system, just more advanced, right? And it's more fair and it's disintermediated and nobody can inspect your messages, right? So we're actually building infrastructure for a new social fabric and potentially an alternative way to socially order ourselves. And that works by viewing blockchains or distributed consensus as a new means of social order that doesn't require the monopoly of violence for legitimacy, but instead derives its legitimacy from voluntary interactions, right, or community consensus. So this goes back to, like, say, Leslie Lamport in 1989. He had this paper talking about the Paxos consensus algorithm. And in that paper, he called it the part-time parliament. And so this is about merchants who were trading, that they would come to the island and they would trade their goods. And the island obviously needed some kind of governing body to manage transactions and make sure there's escrow, these sort of things. But none of them wanted to participate in politics themselves or actually providing the governing services because their trading is more profitable. So they came up with this Paxos algorithm or consensus algorithm to create a distributed legislative system to manage their governing services, so when they were at port, they could participate, but they could leave at any time. And so with this view on blockchains, and this is actually an unrealized idea of the the first cypherpunks, we're now at a stage in technology where this can actually come to fruition.
It's amazing, and I just love your view on this. And I've got a question about the East India Trading Company as well, but I'll get to that. But before, tell me basically, Status started as obviously a big idea, like changing the social fabric, enabling it, but you had to dig pretty deep in order to actually make it happen and build it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, like, Status aimed to be like WeChat without the state surveillance apparatus. So this peer-to-peer, end-to-end encrypted messenger, but also DApp browser and wallet, like this super app. And ultimately, we would like to have decentralized ride sharing and food delivery and all these things. The idea is to live your entire daily life within crypto, right? But we're a little bit early, and the things that we needed to build, what we wanted to build in the way that we wanted to build them, to make sure like they had disintermediate access, which is important for the sovereign individual, didn't exist. So over time, we found ourselves working more on infrastructure and protocol design. So we've done like hardware wallets now, like we've done Nimbus, which is our Ethereum 2 client. We do Fluffy, which is an ultra-light client protocol. We do decentralized file storage under a project that's coming up now called Codex. Yeah, and we do Waku, which was originally Ethereum's peer-to-peer private messaging protocol, and we've fully adopted it and developed it for the past 5, 6, 7 years. So yeah,
It's amazing. Like literally, what you're talking about, like for an anthropologist, is like, oh my god, it's a dream come true. And it was such a good answer. They actually started clapping, if you didn't hear, in the windows over there. But just to move forward as well, we're discussing the metaverse, and unfortunately, like we're kind of preaching to the choir here. But like the average person in the street is pretty like scared of it. They don't know what it means. They don't know what like old Zuckerberg is up to. How do you perceive the way that Meta, for example, is handling things versus like how you want to handle things with the metaverse?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it comes down to this idea of disintermediation again, right? So like both Apple and Meta, for example, create like what are called walled gardens, right? And the problem with that is then they have like a very strong opinion of like what you can and cannot do within their own within their domain. It's not a domain of the people, right? Furthermore, how they build these things is they basically take an existing operating system that's designed for a two-dimensional world and then use some kind of game engine to develop like their interface, which is a great way to get like product market fit and like rapidly get there. But it's also a great way to basically capture literally what you see and hear, right, and do whatever they want with it. So for us, we have a project where we're extending what's called the Wayland Compositor in Linux. So Linux is an open source operating system, and Wayland is what draws things onto the screen. Currently, we're currently, currently, like we have like two-dimensional windows that are on our screen, but we can actually extend that two-dimensional buffer or image to be three-dimensional. So like a three-dimensional depth buffer. And when we have that, it means that processors can now draw geometry or 3D objects into a shared scene graph, which would now be your desktop. So this is really powerful because it means that everything is open source all the way down to the wire. You're fully at liberty to do that, but then every application is sharing some kind of space within your desktop, so to speak, which means that you can have multiple games open, different applications, you can alt-tab between them, maximize them, minimize them. And to me, that just seems like a much better way that can't be evil, and you can always hack on it and change it to suit whatever your needs are.
Yeah. And you mentioned the word evil, and previously you mentioned the word violence. And I know that, which are both good words. And I remember Steven Pinker, he wrote about the fact that like we're in a highly non-violent world, that like the kind of degree or index of violence has massively gone down. But I'm curious, because we're all still humans, whether we will because like I think that the nation states are dying, and like we can talk about that as well, but whether humans, when they have like the freedom, whether they will become violent, and like how you protect people within that. I actually think that people will look after their welfare and they will provide each other with security, but like the average person kind of, it's like the Hobbes and Rousseau kind of debate, like, oh, you can't trust people to be good and you can't trust people to like look after themselves. How do you view that in like through the lens of creating basically like a free space where people have the freedom, like, because people have been afraid to give people that freedom?
Yeah, I mean, like, there are elements of society that, there's always going to be a certain percentage of like violent criminals and these sort of things, right? But the way that we can create these systems is that you enter into these voluntary agreements, and it's not like violence or coercion doesn't have its place. It is enforcement of contracts, right? And so the idea is that if you voluntarily enter into these contracts, you're volunteering into the enforcement. Whereas today, we're born into a nation-state system that at best we have implied or implicit consent with, right? But you actually have no idea what laws you're beholden to, and you're just being a good citizen as much as possible, and like not trying not to murder people, you know?
It's hard sometimes.
Right, but like, I think that the more you have more people in these contracts, then like they will get violated, and then whatever enforcement mechanism there is now much more justified in terms of the consent argument. There's also arguments for, say, doing what's called polycentric or autocentric law over monocentric law. So currently in nation-state systems, we are basically, there's like one court system that we use for all of this stuff. But if you have independent adjudication, you get to voluntarily choose what kind of court system you're using and like what rules you're beholden to. And I think there'll be a natural emergence of like different imagined communities or sub-communities or subcultures that will have their own means of self-determination, their own sets of rules that they're beholden to. But at some point they will come into contact with another tribe, or like right, and there'll need to be this sort of like glue code or glue contracts that say like that allows them to interact with each other peacefully. And of course, there'll be punishments in that as well as rewards. Oh,
you mentioned imagined communities. Read Anderson, 1991, if you can, because he talks beautifully about that. And last question, people don't realize that a lot of the times, like they just think that the nation state has always been here, but like actually Virginia, the colony, was founded by the Virginia Company that had London as its stakeholders, and the East India Trading Company used to basically rule India. It made the first duty-free zones, etc. Where do you see the nation-state developing? What do you think it has to do if it wants to survive?
I think these crypto states or network states are going to start providing governing services according to best practices, and they're going to be a lot more competitive because they are explicit in their consent. It allows us to also service underserviced citizens of nation states where they have failing institutions, say, for example, Argentina. but they're also very applicable to autonomous regions or like proto-states that have been fighting for independence like since the 40s or 50s. I'm talking about Kachin right now, and they are like a proto-state that's north of Myanmar. But there's also like the Rojavans, for example, or even the Catalonian independence movement, right? They all have this need. So for the nation state, I think they'll either have to start competing on governing services. They'll probably suppress us first, then they will compete with us. I mean, if they can't compete with us, then like there is utility in them providing physical security in their boundaries, right, within their existing territories. But there's an argument against in virtual states that most nation states are becoming more interested in having influence over the global economy because almost everything becomes reducible to economic value flows and value capture. And the network state is non-territorial by design, so will be competitive in that landscape as well. Yeah. And hopefully an alternative to the current idea of a new world order. Yeah.
That's amazing. There was a debate in the Oxford Union 3 weeks ago that this house would abolish borders, and it was a really interesting thing. So I'll let you ponder that question yourselves, but I think I feel like my brain has just been to a spa. Thank you so much. It's been awesome, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of Eat Prague, and I'm looking forward to more chats about Augustus. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. And you guys take care. See you soon.